This day of terror rippling from coast to coast. NBC's Jim Avila is at the Sears Tower in downtown Chicago. Jim?
Tom, Chicago's skyline intact but virtually empty tonight as America's skyscrapers were evacuated through most of the day today. That includes Chicago's Sears Tower, the Arco Towers in Los Angeles, the Bank of America in San Francisco, all waiting for the all clear. The nation's landmarks, America's gathering spots, today abandoned as potential terrorist targets, from the Seattle Space Needle and LA City Hall in the west, to Disney World in the southeast, to the world's biggest shopping mall, the Mall of America in Minneapolis, closed. And of course, at the country's tallest building, Sears Tower, and Michigan Avenue in the Midwest, the symbols of American life frozen in fear.
It's scary. Your family away from home, your kids at school, so it's very scary.
America hunkered down. Chicago's financial district virtually empty. Every sworn police officer in the third largest city ordered to the streets. The nation's workforce turning around and heading home. Larry Hudson works at the Sears Tower.
And I got to the elevator and I said, hey, what am I going up for?
Kelly and David McLean split up to go to work this morning and quickly decided home in front of the television set was the safest spot today.
Now this nation has turned, it's turned upside down. Emotionally, perhaps financially, who knows? It's absolutely, it's one of those moments that you can't believe you actually saw played out.
At America's 5,000 airports, total shutdown.
Ground stop for all airports until 1 o'clock. That means that no airplanes will be leaving any of the airports in the United States.
An estimated 200,000 passengers stranded. At O'Hare, world's busiest, a line of jets held on the runway for hours. No open gates, but surprisingly few complaints.
Being upset about missing my plane, that's trivial compared to people that were on the plane and in the buildings.
Military planes like this one in San Francisco escorting the last of the commercial jetliners safely to the ground. But a crippled air travel system is more than inconvenience. Aviation expert Mike Boyd.
Air transportation is part of our communication system. Today it's shut down entirely. People aren't moving A to B. Goods aren't moving. Mail isn't moving. And because of that, we're probably going to have a tens of billions of dollar hit on our economy for this quarter.
Phone service strangled too. America's largest cell phone network, with cell towers atop the World Trade Center destroyed, reports call volume nationally doubled.
We can't compare today's events to anything that we've experienced before. We've withstood earthquakes, hurricanes, significant floods, but nothing like today's event.
Get your 12 extra right here.
In Chicago, 800 miles from the attacks, Karen Davis frustrated in her attempt to work at home.
I could not get a signal on my way home, and then I couldn't get a signal on my home phone when I got here. Just really frustrating not to be able to get in contact with anybody.
Among the events canceled tonight, Major League Baseball postponing games from coast to coast. NBC's Tonight Show called off, and the Emmys, scheduled for Sunday, canceled too.
We all could see the gravity of the situation and realize this is a true national nightmare come true, and that a celebration and a comedy show would just not be something that would be appropriate for this country this weekend.
We cannot let it happen again.
Most of the nation's schools stayed open through the tragic day, students watching terrorism on their own shores for the first time.
And I just was asking myself over and over why they did this.
Teachers trying to make sense of it.
There are other places in the world where this is commonplace, and for us it's a first.
At this hospital in suburban Chicago, Americans responding by lining up to donate blood. Midday church services more crowded than normal.
I guess I'm just looking for a peace in my heart and for peace in other people's hearts and from all the destruction. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave?
At SMU in Dallas, older students sing the national anthem at an outdoor rally, mixing tears and patriotism. Experts say Americans should expect a jump in the national anxiety level.
They may be irritable, they may be really very acutely aware of their environment around them and any kind of threats to them.
Also tonight, some of the first effects of the fear in economic fashion. Already today, there's been problems with gas gouging. In fact, gas prices have gone up in Kansas to as much as $5 a gallon. Tom?
NBC's Jim Avila tonight reporting on the length and breadth of this country from Chicago, the heartland of America. Told now we have a tracking tape. It shows the pattern of the flight that went into the first of the twin trade towers. It took off from Boston. That would be Flight 11 American Airlines. And then you can see that sharp left turn as it heads for New York, well off course. And the second plane headed now going from New York, and then this is the second one that comes into New York. The second one goes from Newark to Pennsylvania, where it went down. There's still some uncertainty about whether that was going to be directed by the hijackers into one of the other many government or financial buildings that could have been a target for it, either in the Washington, D.C. or New York area. We don't know for sure. Of course, for many Americans tonight, the anger and the rage that they feel is directed at one man that they have never seen except on some vague videotape. Osama bin Laden, the world's best-known Islamic extremist. He's on almost everyone's list of the most likely suspects for today's attacks, and NBC's Keith Miller has more on him tonight from London for us. Keith?
Tom, he is one of the most dangerous terrorists on the planet. The U.S. government has put a $5 million bounty on his head. Osama bin Laden was last seen publicly this January at his son's wedding in Afghanistan. Rare pictures of a man who reportedly travels only at night, often in disguise, surrounded by bodyguards. He made his reputation in the 1980s, fighting the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan.
He was involved in some horrific battles, which he said later gave him a sort of tranquility and a sense of peace. And it basically made him a pretty fearless guy.
Today, the Central Intelligence Agency calls him the most immediate and serious threat to U.S. security. Bin Laden says the jihad against the United States and killing of Americans is the core of his faith. He was born into a family of wealth, power, and privilege in Saudi Arabia 44 years ago. It was during his days as a student studying economics that he turned to radical Islam. He is linked to a series of global terrorist attacks. February 1993, the bombing of the World Trade Center in New York, 6 dead, more than 1,000 injured. August 7, 1998, the simultaneous U.S. embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania, more than 200 killed. And last year, the suicide bomb attack on the USS Cole, resulting in the death of 17 American servicemen.
He alone, probably within the Islamic world, has amassed and developed a terrorist network, an international network, which would be capable of carrying out such an atrocity.
After the embassy bombing, the American government retaliated with missile strikes. The missiles damaged bin Laden's headquarters in Afghanistan, but he escaped unharmed. The U.S. has demanded that the radical Islamic government in Afghanistan hand bin Laden over to American authorities. But the Afghans have refused, despite bin Laden's declaration that all U.S. citizens are legitimate targets.
He's targeted the US because he sees America as the head of the snake, as he calls it. The body of the snake is the corrupt governments in the Middle East that he has promised to overthrow, and also Israel.
Meanwhile, his popularity in the region is reportedly increasing. Recently, an estimated 25,000 followers scattered around the world and prepared to engage in a holy war against America. From Afghanistan tonight, a statement from the government claiming bin Laden didn't do it. Meanwhile, U.S. intelligence officials say he was last seen near Jalalabad in eastern Afghanistan, but because he moves at least 3 times a week, he will remain difficult to catch. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Keith Miller tonight. We want to give you an update now. The President of the United States will be addressing this nation on this difficult day at 8:30 Eastern Time tonight. And of course, we will bring that to you live. There are people around the world who do not wish America well. We know that as a result of today's attacks, but also on the basis of their reaction to what happened here today. Some of them are even celebrating. With that story, here's NBC's Martin Fletcher in Tel Aviv. Martin?
Tom, Israel is declaring a day of mourning tomorrow in solidarity with the United States, but not all reaction here has been so sympathetic. There's a sense here among some Palestinians that America had it coming. These Palestinians in East Jerusalem today delighted at the bombings and American loss of life, offering cakes and sweets, calling out, "God is great." Thousands more celebrate in other West Bank towns until Palestinian police disperse them. The Palestinian leader, however, stunned and sympathetic.
We are completely shocked, unbelievable.
But the voice of the street reflects anger at America's role, especially in Israel and Iraq.
We should show America that they should learn and they should know what is to attack somebody like Iraq. It should be more.
And many Arabs furious at American support for Israel. This man holds up an American-made bomb part fired by American-made aircraft used by Israel. American support for Israel, some believe, makes America a legitimate target for terrorism. Many also angry at years of almost daily American bomb attacks against Iraq, which didn't stop with the end of the Gulf War a decade ago. And US troops still in Saudi Arabia. Osama bin Laden, the prime suspect in today's terror attacks, angry at American support for what he calls the tyrannical government of Saudi Arabia, his homeland, and for America's close ties with Israel. In almost a year of unrest, more than a dozen Palestinian suicide bombers and other attackers have killed 170 Israelis, while Israel has killed more than 570 Palestinians. A conflict that always threatens to suck neighboring countries into the fighting. Israel tonight called for an international war against terrorism.
The fight against terror is an international struggle of the free world against the forces of darkness who seek to destroy our liberty and our way of life.
Today, the leader of Hamas, the Islamic militants who send most suicide bombers against Israel, called on America to change its policies. Sheikh Yassin said America is behind injustices in many parts of the world, but then he said Hamas doesn't support attacks against civilians. Tonight, Israel closed its airspace to foreign airlines and then closed its land borders to prevent any possible terrorist attacks. There's a sense here that Palestinian militants may try to take advantage of the confusion to kill more Israelis. Tom?
Thank you very much, NBC's Martin Fletcher. An already very complex and volatile situation in the Middle East is even more so tonight. Now to a different kind of problem. The World Trade Center towers were some of the most famous buildings in the world, of course. They've survived hurricanes, fires, and even one previous terrorist bombing. NBC's Roger O'Neill talked to the architect of those buildings and how they were put up and what brought them down.
Hyman Brown was the project engineer on the Twin Towers, the man on the ground in charge of making sure the buildings were built right, the way it was designed.
There was a lot of pride in it, and we were doing something that hadn't been done before. But no one ever considered any types of forces like this.
Brown, who spent 6 years building the towers from day one in 1966, says the planes didn't cause the towers to collapse, but rather the fire and tremendous heat that exposed the steel superstructure to forces it could not withstand.
Structural steel is fireproof to last between 1 and 2 hours, which it did, and then steel melts.
Each tower was built around a central core. That core kept the building up, supporting the tower's so-called dead weight. But when steel melts, according to Brown, like dominoes, it falls. Brown says the towers were built to withstand 200-mile-an-hour hurricanes, the 100-year storm, the worst nature could dish out. But he says an airplane crash never entered anyone's mind. Still, it appears the outside columns, made of prefabricated steel, absorbed most of the energy from the planes and may have kept the two towers from collapsing immediately. University of Colorado engineering professor Stein Stur thinks the energy from those large planes would be equivalent to a medium 5 or 6 Richter scale earthquake.
As the airplanes came in and hit, energy was absorbed tremendously. Some of that core may have been damaged tremendously, and maybe this was part cause to this implosion.
The way the towers collapsed seems similar to pictures we've become accustomed to watching, as old buildings like the Kingdome in Seattle are taken down with explosives. Mark Loazza, whose controlled demolition company does that sort of work, says once a building starts falling, it releases a lot of stored energy.
We use explosives as a catalyst to release that potential energy, converts it into kinetic energy, gets the building moving.
NBC's Roger O'Neill tonight on the stunning destruction of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center here in Manhattan as a result of a terrorist attack. All hour long we've been trying to bring you Rahema Ellis and her diary of what she went through during the day, and we're going to do that for you right now.
New York City's Brooklyn Bridge, normally clogged with vehicles, today an escape route. It's 11:45 in the morning, and there is a mass exodus from downtown New York City. You can take a look and you can see hundreds of thousands of people leaving the area. Police are evacuating this particular area. Were you afraid for your life?
Completely terrified. We were all crying, hysterical. We were wanting to get out of there and not knowing where to go and which direction to run in and how far we can go. And I'm still worried about my life. Yeah, it's horrifying.
Another sign of how quickly people deserted the area. This is a fruit stand only about 8 to 10 blocks away from the World Trade Center. Normally there would be people crowded in the streets trying to buy some fruit from the man who may have worked here. Now it's deserted. Nothing is left but his fruit covered in ash. What went through your head when you saw that?
Still completely devastated. Completely.
Devastation.
People jumping out of the windows was indescribable.
I'm watching the thing, and all of a sudden it starts crashing, this tremendous noise, and instinct obviously tells you to turn the other way and run, which we all did. People were getting trampled and bleeding.
We're now just a block away from the World Trade Center, and the closer we get to ground zero, the harder it is to breathe and to see. You have to wear a mask, and you need to wear some sort of glasses. Otherwise, it is choking and blinding smoke. Behind me, ordinarily you would be able to see the Twin Towers, but today all you can see is the thick black smoke that is clouding the area. All on the street there is this thick ash. It's at least an inch thick. There are paper strewn all over everywhere. And the area literally is deserted, with the exception of the emergency workers who are continually trying to push people away from the area for their own safety. What do you think this is?
I have no idea.
What your guess is?
Pulverized cement.
Pulverized cement?
Concrete, yeah.
The concrete. These firefighters, just some of the hundreds, waiting for their turn to go into the World Trade Center area. Already they are covered in soot, tired, and worried about what they're going to see when they get to ground zero. What happened to you?
I was inside the building trying to get people out when the building fell.
When do you think that we will be able to begin to go in and start to really search for some of the victims inside?
They're searching right now on a limited basis. As soon as they get organized, we'll be sending more and more people in to do more and more work.
NYU Downtown Hospital has the only emergency room in Lower Manhattan. The first victims from the blast were brought here. The cafeteria has been turned into a triage area. Hospital officials say there are victims wall to wall. 8 years ago, this hospital took in the first victims from the World Trade Center bombing. Officials here say they try to plan for disasters. 2 weeks ago, they went through an emergency drill, but no one ever imagined they'd be tested so soon. Rahema Ellis, NBC News in Lower Manhattan.
NBC's Rahema Ellis, who was in the middle of it all. We want to remind you that we'll have continuing coverage until 1 tomorrow morning on this NBC station. The President of the United States, his speech to the nation at 8:30 Eastern Time tonight. It has now been about 11 hours since the first attack on the Twin Trade Towers and the stunning sequence of events that followed. It all happened so rapidly and in plain view that it somehow seemed surreal, more a television image than the cold-blooded, calculated acts of terrorism that in fact it was. This is a day without end, for we do not know yet the full price in lives lost, whether there are other targets to come, and most important, how we will respond to this terrorist attack, how we strike back militarily, how we defend ourselves at home, how we heal all the wounds of this day. America has been attacked, and it has been changed. This is the first great test of the new century for this nation, for its new president. It's also a great test for us all, wherever we live, whatever our age, whatever our beliefs. Tonight, as we remind you, we'll have continuing coverage. We want to share with you now the images and the sounds of this unforgettably dark day in America. It was the ultimate act of terrorism. 2 hijacked planes crashing into the World Trade Center, collapsing what was once one of the tallest buildings in the world, leaving a scene some described as a nuclear winter. Good evening, everyone. It was one of the darkest days in America through the day and into the night, and it is not over. New York and the nation will never be the same. What was once a symbol of America's might is tonight a scene of utter devastation. Piles of rubble, acres of gray ash, a death toll that some estimate could reach into the thousands. Hundreds of rescue workers, very little hope in the rubble of the World Trade Center. And this is the scene tonight at the Pentagon, hit by another hijacked plane shortly after the attack on the World Trade Center. The Pentagon says it does not yet know how many people were killed or injured. President Bush, facing the first and largest crisis of his presidency, one of the largest crises of any modern president, first got word of this attack while he was in Florida today. He then flew to a secure underground bunker near Omaha, the Strategic Air Command headquarters, before returning tonight to the White House and an address to the nation at 8:30. In a brief statement earlier, the president said freedom itself was attacked this morning, and freedom will be defended. Make no mistake, he said, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for what he called these cowardly acts. Tonight, over the next 3 hours, we will be looking for answers to some of the questions we all were asking today. How could this happen? What do we do now? How can we prevent it from happening again? How will it change us? We start tonight with NBC's Campbell Brown, who joins us from near the White House. Campbell?
Tom, the president is now preparing his speech to the nation. Aides tell us it will be a message of resolve and reassurance that our nation has been tested before and has always prevailed. Since Bush arrived here at the White House about 7 p.m. Eastern Time, he has been huddled with his national security team. He did speak with them earlier today when he was in Nebraska by a live teleconference, and this is according to White House aides. He told his team, quote, "We will find these people and they will suffer the consequences of taking on this nation. We will do what it takes. No one is going to diminish the spirit of this country." We are also told by aides that a point he will make tonight is that he wants Americans to return to their lives, to demonstrate that this has not affected the American spirit. This will not diminish the country. Now, Tom, obviously the president's security today was a top priority, and that's why he was shuttled across the country on Air Force One today, as you said, beginning in Sarasota, Florida, where he was first informed, then flying to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. from there going to Nebraska, to the U.S. Strategic Command Center, where he addressed his national security team, then back to the White House. Aides tell us there is a plan in place when they believe there is a threat to the president, and that today they implemented that plan, moving him around on Air Force One and deliberately not telling us where he would be going at any point in time. They also say that gave the president's national security team, Vice President Dick Cheney and National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, who were here at the White House in the Situation Room, that gave them time to assess the threat, to gather information, and they say it was the president who made the decision to return to Washington to address the nation tonight. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Campbell Brown. There was an exceptional bipartisan appearance on the steps of the Capitol tonight. Members of the congressional leadership, Republican and Democrat, House and Senate, gathered to say that we stand fully behind the president. And then, as Tim Russert was witness to all of this as well, Tim, they broke into God Bless America.
Tom, an extraordinary scene here in Washington. 24 hours ago, rancor, bipartisanship, not tonight. National unity, indeed a new tone in Washington. The notion of a lockbox for Social Security seems so minuscule to people now across the country and even here in Washington. They understand what this has meant. That's why all eyes on the president tonight. Democrats and Republicans have told him, Mr. President, whatever you say, we are behind you.
All right, Tim Russert, we'll ask you to stand by there throughout the evening. We're going to go to the Pentagon now, and our Pentagon correspondent, Jim Miklashevsky, who was on duty this morning when he said there seemed to have been an explosion at the Pentagon. We now know that it was a hijacked airliner crashing into that building. Jim, do we have any sense tonight of the death toll or the casualty list at the Pentagon?
No, it's going to run into the scores. There were more than 60 people on the plane and an undetermined number of people still buried beneath the rubble here behind us. Searchers have entered the building. They've been in there for about 5 hours now, Tom. There is no exact casualty toll that's been released. They've set up a temporary morgue inside the center courtyard of the Pentagon for tonight. But in the meantime, there was also an expression of resolve here at the Pentagon from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Hugh Shelton, who reaffirmed America's resolve and issued a firm pledge to retaliate against those responsible. And the Pentagon has always had contingency plans to attack a variety of targets of the known terrorist, Osama bin Laden. And we've been told that military planners are taking a close look at those contingencies tonight, Tom.
All right, thanks very much. NBC's Jim Miklashevsky, and joining me now is former Secretary of the Treasury, former Secretary of State, former White House Chief of Staff, James Baker, who was deeply involved, of course, in the administration of George Herbert Walker Bush, the 41st President of the United States during the Persian Gulf War. Obviously, the highest priority must be assigned to finding out who was responsible for this, Mr. Baker, but then describe for us, sketch for us, if you will, in diplomatic terms, what the first steps ought to be.
Well, I think there are a number of steps, Tom, that have to be taken. First of all, we need to look at our intelligence gathering capabilities. We need to look at the security measures and standards at our airports. And then, of course, we do have contingency plans for striking back. There really are not a lot of easy answers in that regard, but we do have contingency plans. All of the administrations I've served have had those plans. This administration has them, and I'm sure they will implement them. And we are pretty good at that kind of operation if we can pinpoint exactly who was responsible for this atrocious series of events.
And do we dispatch special emissaries to the Middle East, to Tel Aviv, also to Riyadh, to Saudi Arabia, to Jordan and the other Arab states there, so that we can get everybody calmed down?
Well, we will probably be doing that, whether it's through the use of special emissaries or not, I don't know. It doesn't have to be special emissaries. I think we ought not to rush too quickly to the judgment here that this happened because there was a lull in the peace process in the Middle East, particularly if it's Osama bin Laden, and that would be my #1 suspect. He's been at this for quite some time. He took out our embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. He took out the Khobar Towers, or had some role in it. And so I don't think we ought to draw the connection too quickly between the absence of progress in the peace process in the Middle East and what happened to America today. I think these people that did this have been dead set for a long time on a terrorist attack against America. They've succeeded, unfortunately. It's really rather amazing that they were able to do what they did with respect to the commercial airliners. We haven't had a hijacking in this country, I don't think, of an airliner for over 10 years. So we need to take some careful looks at what happened, exactly what happened, and what we can do to prevent it in the future. Let me just say one final thing. When I was in government at high levels, and I was here for 12 years in Washington, D.C., we foreclosed a lot of similar type attacks that had been planned, maybe not as sophisticated as this one, but we rolled up a lot of operations, and generally speaking, the counterintelligence and counterterrorism capabilities of the United States have functioned very effectively. We may, however, now be entering into a new era, and we may have to see some significant new measures.
But that's my very point. Take it out of the context of what's going on between Israel and the PLO. A lot of the moderate Arab states have been targets for this same kind of fanatic activity as well.
That's correct. And when there is violence in the Middle East, when there is terrorism, the more moderate states, whether they're Arab states or the United States or our allies in Europe, we tend to be diminished, because those who argue for peace and those who support peace are hurt when the rejectionists and the radicals succeed. And that's, of course, what this is. This is success by the radical elements at the very highest levels.
All right, thank you very much. James Baker, former Secretary of State, former Secretary of the Treasury, and, of course, White House Chief of Staff during the Reagan administration, who has seen more than his share of crises. But he was looking out the window of his Washington law office today and looked on in disbelief as he saw smoke billowing up from the Pentagon, not realizing at the moment, of course, that it had been the target of a direct hit by a hijacked airliner. And on board that airliner, by the way, was Barbara Olson, a well-known Washington lawyer. Well, this is the scene in New York tonight. This is a city that is still hurting very deeply. The New York City Firefighters Union says tonight, these are unconfirmed numbers, but it's from the Firefighters Union, that it has lost, and the city has lost, 200 of its finest. 200 firemen killed today in the World Trade Center attack. The buildings came down, of course. Many of those firemen were at the base of those buildings, involved in firefighting and rescue efforts at the time. That's the first number that we've had from a reliable source that comes from the Firefighters Union tonight. Earlier, Mayor Giuliani would only say that he expected the death toll to be horrendous. At one point, they had 1,500 people being treated at Liberty Park, which is at the tip of Manhattan. This will be going on throughout the evening in New York. Let's go to NBC's Robert Hager now and see what the very latest is on the hijacking of these 4 planes today, 2 from Boston, 1 from Newark, and 1 from Washington Dulles. Robert?
Tom, there are little glimmers coming out of what may have gone on in the cockpits of some of these planes. The Attorney General John Ashcroft in his news conference this evening mentioned knives when he was talking about the first of these planes to be hijacked, the American airliner out of Boston Logan that was the first to go into World Trade Center number 1. There were several cell phone calls from planes. You mentioned Barbara Olson, the wife of Solicitor General Theodore Olson. She called her husband twice before the plane that she was on, which was one that left Dulles and was bound for Los Angeles, before that plane crashed into the Pentagon. And she mentioned people in the back of the plane with knife-like devices. There was another person who called a relative from a plane and said that the passengers and the pilots of that plane had been herded into the back and that the terrorists were at the controls of the aircraft. We haven't heard guns mentioned yet, but presumably those were weapons too taken aboard, but no one has confirmed that at all at this point. Other cell phone calls monitored from people. There was one unconfirmed report of a flight attendant on that first flight, the Boston flight, who called and said that the crew had been killed and that she'd been locked in the restroom, and then they didn't hear any more from her. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Robert Hager tonight. Robert, let me just catch up with you quickly. tomorrow we do expect that air travel will resume at noon Eastern time. But what should travelers expect in terms of security at airports?
Oh, it will be very, very strong, and I'm not sure they'll actually do it at noon Eastern time is what we've heard, but we simply said that there was not going to be, this is the FAA said, any more travel until noon tomorrow, and then they would reassess at that point. So we don't know for sure that they'll resume at noon.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Robert Hager. This day, it's the 11th of September, the year 2001. Some people have said the 9th month, the 11th day, 911, is a day that will be in bold print in future history books, a day that is a dark mark for this country, a day that everyone will remember where they were when they heard the news. After all, our largest city and most vital financial market immobilized, the country terrorized politically and psychologically. Dateline's Stone Phillips tonight takes us through this astonishing day, minute by minute.
Today, the unimaginable happened. At the start of a busy workday, New Yorkers heard an explosion, then looked up to see a symbol of America's economic power, one of the World Trade Center's twin towers billowing smoke and flames.
Yeah, the glass, just flames exploded out the front of the World Trade Center. Glass flew everywhere.
Minutes later, literally from out of the blue, an even more horrifying sight. A jetliner bearing down on the other tower. It was a direct hit.
A second airplane, a 727, just rammed into the building.
Before the hour was out, the symbol of American military power, the Pentagon, was also in flames. It too apparently the target of a new weapon, a passenger jet hijacked and turned into a guided missile. Across the country, shock, sorrow, fear, outrage, and the realization that America was under attack. About 8:45 this morning, the sky over Manhattan was clear following a night of violent thunderstorms. In the city's financial district, the very heart of American commerce, thousands of workers were already at their desks. Moments later, in the upper reaches of the 110-story North Tower, sudden impact.
As Matt just mentioned, we have a breaking news story to tell you about. Apparently, a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center here in New York City.
1 second after the sound started, there was gray smoke and what looked to be like confetti flying all over the place.
Fire and death above, confusion below, as some 10,000 people streamed out of the building.
There was a lady had a big gash on her head, so it was people stampeding one over top of another.
Witnesses reported a horrifying scene. Desperate people jumping from the burning skyscraper. Bloody clothing and body parts scattered on the streets below. As emergency crews rushed to the southern tip of Manhattan, the immediate thought, could it really be happening again?
Step back, okay? I'm on the job, guys.
In 1993, the same building was hit by a truck bomb, Islamic militants hoping to topple the one tower into the other. 6 people died in that attack, and 1,500 were injured. But within the first minutes today, it was clear that the toll this time would be much higher. Then, at 9:03, less than 20 minutes after the first strike, with police and rescue personnel still scrambling to respond,
I mean, do you know
this.
if there were many people in the building?
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very large plane just flew directly over my building, and there's been another collision. Can you see it? I can see it on this shot.
Live cameras trained on the first stricken tower captured another huge explosion, this one on the South Tower. Only this time, the attack was documented. This indelible image to be replayed again and again, seared into the American memory.
And here it comes right there.
An American Airlines 767 with 92 people on board hijacked on its flight from Boston to Los Angeles, becoming the implement of mass murder. The impact was devastating, the airliner punching through the skin of the huge tower, another rain of glass, concrete, and terror.
It's like this unbelievable ball of fire, and the whole street, which is now awakened, everyone's like, whoa. People start crying, people start running.
It was now clear that this was no accident. The first tower had also been hit by a hijacked passenger jet, a United flight that had also taken off from Boston, bound for LA.
The attacks left New York virtually paralyzed. Tunnels and bridges linking the city shut down, subways closed, telephone lines jammed, cell phones overloaded as frantic callers tried to contact loved ones. At 9:30, President Bush, in Florida to talk about education, addressed a nation reeling and in need of reassurance.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
But even as the president pledged to hunt down and punish those responsible, another attack, this one even more audacious. The target, the Pentagon. Another American Airlines jet bound for Los Angeles had been hijacked, this one taking off from Washington's Dulles Airport. It was another direct hit. NBC's Pentagon correspondent Jim Miklaszewski suddenly found himself on the front lines of a war that had come home.
I don't want to alarm anybody right now, but apparently it felt just a few moments ago like there was an explosion of some kind here at the Pentagon.
9:43 a.m. With concern that the White House could be a target, President Bush boarded Air Force One bound for a special secure command post at a military base. At 9:49, the Federal Aviation Administration announced it was shutting down the nation's air traffic. In a world turned upside down, hundreds of passenger planes crisscrossing the country were now potential terrorist weapons.
The Federal Aviation Administration ordered all airports closed, and all planes which were in the air were directed to land at the nearest airport.
This morning, on a scale beyond belief, Americans experienced what it's like to feel truly vulnerable, to realize when someone is willing to die for a cause, we are all potential targets. The #1 suspect, this man,